Welcome back to Sidewalk, Skyline podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Rogers. And today I've got a friend that I've known for, I can't even count the years, well, at least 20. And his name's Alan Campbell. He's the founder of Refuge Ministries Canada, a ministry that works with young offenders as well as some adults that are in and out of jail and trying to get established in the community. He's based in London, Ontario, where he lives with his wife, Sharon. And actually, it's probably closer to 30 years that we've been aware of each other and had a great appreciation for each other. There's hardly a week goes by when Alan doesn't call me up to see how I'm doing and to talk about things. And I have some good memories of working with Alan. I remember going with him into Blue Water Detention Center. I remember going into a little church in Ailsa Craig for a conference that he was involved in, and many other events. And so welcome, Alan. I have no problem calling you friend.
Thank you, Pastor Kevin.
Yeah. Hey, well, let's just get right into it. For anybody that doesn't know you, your story really begins in a bit of a tragic childhood. You were 16 years old when you got kicked out of the house and were living on the streets in Toronto. So somewhere way back when, Jesus had a plan that you probably couldn't have seen coming. So why don't you just take me back and tell me your story again about your childhood and just that whole ordeal of ending up on the streets and where that led you.
So I was born in Windsor, November 30th, 1963, and my grandparents actually lived at Gladstone and Tecumseh.
Not far from me.
No, and we lived in Windsor until I was 4, but my dad had separated from his first wife. So I have 2 half-sisters and a half-brother. And when we lived in Windsor, we lived on Chatham Street, where the casino is now, in an apartment. And my mom worked at Union Gas, and my dad worked at Assumption University. My mom got a job with Polysar in Sarnia, so we moved from Windsor to Sarnia when I was 4, and I grew up in Sarnia and then a small town called Corunna, about 10 minutes from Sarnia. And growing up, I really did experience a lot of rejection. My dad would very often say, "You're never going to amount to anything. You can do nothing right. Your half-sisters, your half-brother, they can do nothing wrong." And so I really grew up with a lot of rejection and a lack of identity. I didn't do very well in school. When I went to grade 9, I was 4'6" and 90 pounds. And I experienced a lot of rejection in high school because of my size. And I began to cut classes in high school. And if you cut a class in the high school that I was at, you had to go and see Mr. Farrar. And when you went to see him, he would always ask, "What was your reason for cutting a class?" And I never had one. So at 16, I was kicked out of my home, kicked out of high school, took the money that I had in my pocket, and went and lived on the street in Toronto after spending the $100 that I had when I left home. Well, at 16, I also had my growth spurt, so I was no longer 4'6" and 90 pounds. And because of the rejection, I very much had an issue with anger and did everything I could on the street in Toronto to basically survive, including going to jail, sleeping in stairwells, assaulting people, whatever I had to do, I did it. Well, then I had the opportunity to begin to deal drugs for organized crime in Toronto as a 16-year-old. And from 17 to 19, I was heavily involved in organized crime in Toronto and addicted to cocaine. And back in the early 80s, I was making $1,000 a week and riding in Cadillacs and really had life as I thought, as it should be. Well, one night at 19, a drug deal went bad, and I took the gun out of my pocket and pistol whipped someone within an inch of killing him while high on cocaine. So I was charged with assault with a deadly weapon, trafficking cocaine, and when I went to court in Toronto, they had someone with the same name whose birth date was November 3rd, 1963, and my birth date is November 30th, 1963, and he had done a murder in Winnipeg, and they were convinced that I was him.
Oh boy.
So I had grown up in church. We went to the Presbyterian Church on Victoria Street in downtown Windsor, right next to the halfway house where you served as the community chaplain.
That's right.
So I knew all about the Lord. I acknowledged the Lord, but had no relationship with him. It was really all about a performance mentality and trying to measure up. And I couldn't measure up. I just couldn't do or meet the expectations that were set. And so when I was 19, I was arrested and I spent a year in the Don jail. And 2 volunteers would come into the jail every Thursday night and every Sunday, and they would simply say, Alan, you need to make a decision to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. And I wanted nothing to do with that because I knew all about religion. But the one thing is, when they said they would come, they were there. I was sentenced to 9 years in Millhaven Penitentiary on June the 26th, 1983. And July the 4th, 1983, at 8 o'clock at night, I had a vision of Jesus Christ in my jail cell. And the simple question was, Alan, are you sick and tired of being sick and tired?
Mm.
And in all honesty, Pastor Kevin, I thought if this Jesus thing was a scam, oh well, I was going to be in prison for 9 years for what I had done. And I made a decision that night to accept the Lord. And that was July the 4th, 1983. And I have been completely clean since that time with a full pardon from Correctional Services of Canada.
Wow, thank God. Did you find the trouble or did the trouble find you?
A combination of both.
Yeah. And when you say organized crime, like was that with the bikers or
Toronto Mafia.
Toronto Mafia? Yeah. And when you were living that life, yeah, I mean, you had an awareness of Jesus, but that wasn't for you. Yeah. But it's interesting how a couple volunteers in the jail just were consistent, right?
And they were very straight in what they said. They certainly did not mix any words.
Mm-hmm.
And that was what I needed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, you work with um, people that are incarcerated, people that are coming out of jail, people that are on their way into jail, and when you and then just your office in London, like you're always being exposed to the street population. And in comparison to when you were on the streets as a young man, what do you think's changed and what's remained the same? How are the
What
streets today?
what has made a significant difference is in 2004 they implemented the Youth Justice Act. And the philosophy behind that was that we, as a Canadian society, are very much about restorative justice and not punishment, which is a good thing. Um, but only 14% of the youth that are convicted actually go to custody.
Hmm.
And there's actually only 6 youth jails in the whole province of Ontario. So I think part of the problem is I think it's very good that we're about restorative justice, but in some way we need to have a stronger deterrent
Right,
than we
right,
do.
right.
Um, for example, when I was 16 and I went to jail, I was in adult jail. There was no Youth Justice Act.
Hmm.
Um, the thing that has not changed is they're looking constantly for identity and love.
Yeah.
And and that is something that will never change.
Um, from your early years and then jail, and then you came to Jesus. Has there been much reconciliation with your family of origin after all that?
Well, what happened is I was paroled after 4 years to London
Hmm.
because this was the closest halfway house to where my mom and dad were.
Hmm.
So what happened is I successfully graduated from the halfway house. I went back to high school at 23. And part of that process is on the weekends, I would go back to see my mom and dad. And simply by doing the right thing and not even necessarily saying anything, um, those bridges were rebuilt that had been broken. Um, my mom and dad are both passed away now. Um, but that relationship was really fully restored with all of my family.
Sometimes when we hear about people coming to Jesus and having a dramatic conversion like you did, um, we don't even necessarily like we can understand looking on, oh, look at the change in behavior, look at the change in attitude. Um, but the changes that you must have went through on the inside that you probably didn't even have words to describe what was happening. Like, so I think about, okay, so you were 17, you're addicted to cocaine, you're carrying a gun, you're selling drugs, and and if necessary, you were violent. Um, Talk to me about what goes on inside a man when he gives himself to violence. You like I can't imagine that I'm sure you have angry moments when you think, boy, I'd like to plow that guy, right? But you would never again pick up a gun and pistol whip somebody or point it at them. Like, talk about violence and how how that was at work in you. Like how does that happen so that you're able to just say, I'm just going to do this?
In my case, and with anyone that struggles with anger, the anger is the surface issue, the rejection is the root. And when I was doing the cocaine, um, I was very much impulsive and would just act on the trigger when it happened and not give any thought to what the consequence might be. And I was completely self-centered and focused on Alan and could care less about anything or anyone else.
So if you think back to when Jesus captured your heart, um, it it must have, was it unnerving to go through some of those inward changes? And what changed right away? What took a long time to change?
Um, the big thing is that you're absolutely vulnerable. Um, and I was in a situation when I was in prison that a lot of those that I was in jail with, I had known from before. So it may sound funny, but there's almost an accountability that goes with it. Like, let's just really see if this whole thing is real, or we'll just give it some time
Mm-hmm.
and see what happens.
Did your old friends have grace for you, or were they more of testing and provoking you to try to bring you back?
Well, they would do things to try and bring me back. But I just had to stay the course.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, what you had this vision of Jesus? Are you sick and tired of being sick and tired? And was that when you surrendered your life, or was it sometime after that?
No, it was that night,
That night?
8 o'clock, July the 4th, 1983.
Yeah. Can you relive it a bit?
Well, it was a Thursday night, so Jake and John had just come in for their visit, and I was in my cell just having a lot of time to think, and I thought, you know what? Um, even if this is not true, I've got nothing to lose.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm willing to give Jesus the opportunity to prove that he is who he says he is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Like I mentioned in the introduction, I think I've known you pretty close to 30 years. And at least I think I knew about you maybe even before we met. And but when 30 years ago, you would have still been fairly young and as a Christian. Um, and your journey to wholeness, you were a few years out of jail and going back to finish high school. And I remember when I first met you, Alan, like, to think that today you speak regularly in front of large crowds of people and small groups of people, and you have such a rapport one-on-one with people. When I first met you, I remember that it was hard for you to even finish a sentence. I remember how when you would speak in public, there'd be long pauses where it was just you had a job to do, which was obviously speaking, but to watch the growth in your life over these years, and see how, you really, God really got a hold of you and gave you a capacity beyond anything that life had given you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And today, I mean, you're a great communicator. And what are some other life skills and attitudes that you had to learn with Jesus, coming from kind of a difficult start?
Well, I went after I finished my parole in the halfway house into a program called Turning Point.
Hmm.
And it was at Turning Point I understood that I was addicted to cocaine, but didn't really have a full understanding of why that was. And I realized at Turning Point that the reason I had such an issue with anger was all of the rejection that I had experienced. And in Ephesians chapter 1, verse 4, it says that we were chosen to be his sons before the foundation of the world, holy and blameless in him. And I understood that I was forgiven by God, but at Turning Point, I really came to realize that I had the ability to forgive myself by what he had done. And the tendency is when we do some bad things, um, we keep track of that in our head. And again, it was the whole idea that you had to measure up or you had to perform or you had to meet certain expectations of people had of you. And I really, when I realized that I was forgiven and able to forgive myself, that really was a turning point and really did set me free. The other things that happened is I could be quite emotional, and I think I have learned to be more thoughtful before I react or become emotional
Hmm. Hmm.
to something that's happening.
Hmm.
Um, I'm much more empathetic,
Hmm.
not sympathetic, as far as
But
understanding what other people are dealing with.
yeah.
And I really do have a very difficult time when people are treated unjustly.
Hmm.
And I really want to go to bat for them. And through a lot of things that have happened, I feel I'm more faithful to Jesus and more consistent in my walk
Yeah.
because with the type of ministry that we both do, it can be quite emotional.
Hmm.
So you
Hmm.
very much have to keep your head about you and keep things in perspective.
I think about people that I've known, probably people you've known, that have been involved in frontline work with people that are in crisis and chaos, and some people, they get compassion fatigue. They burn out. Some people get very jaded and political in this kind of work. Uh, but as long as I've known you, Alan, I've always seen a man who, it's pretty simple. You love Jesus, and and how do you keep yourself from getting jaded? How do you keep yourself from being overwhelmed uh, by the constant barrage of challenges that walk through your door?
Well, I very much try to set boundaries and keep things in perspective.
Hmm.
As you know, we can get up in the morning and not really know what we're going to deal with, and then things change.
Hmm.
Um, and I really cast my cares upon Him, and just really use discernment when it comes to the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're talking a lot about, you know, the transformation that you've been through, and just how God has uh, been your father. He's he's got the plan. He's got the craftsmanship over your life, and has shaped you for his purposes. But what we haven't really talked about at this point is Refuge Ministries, and what all that is. You know, tell us about some of the things that Refuge is involved in, has been involved in, some of the things that Lord willing, and life isn't too short. You hope to still be doing over the next chapter.
So, our mission statement is supporting individuals that are released from custody as they transition into our community.
Mm-hmm.
And we basically do four things. We serve as the first point of contact for those that get released from custody. We have 5 transition houses, and we have 18 individuals living in those houses in London. We do a radio show called Refuge Freedom Stories, which is a half-hour testimony show that your band Two Fish,
Yeah, we got the theme song. Thank you.
I Am Not Condemned,
Mm-hmm.
which is one of my absolute favorite songs.
We'll have to sing it when you're down.
The radio show is currently on 10 stations, and we're at about 9,000 downloads, and we've just done 150 shows. And we do release kits that we hand out to the probation offices and the parole office. And what that is just a Ziploc bag, and they're given a Bible, a gospel tract, toothpaste, toothbrush, deodorant, soap, a comb, a notebook, and a pen. And we have a network of churches that put those together for us.
Oh, that's fantastic. Uh, the first point of contact, if people are not familiar with the criminal justice system, um, paint a picture of a young person or an old person that's been in lockup maybe for years, and if they're fortunate in a long bit to go to a halfway house partway through their sentence. But just talk about some of the realities, like in federal time. You served federal time that was 2 years plus, and then the provincial jails are 2 years less a day, so shorter sentences. Maybe talk a little bit about the difference between the two, and in both cases, some of the likely scenarios on the day that somebody gets out of jail.
Well, let me tell you a story that will probably illustrate that well. I got a phone call from a young man who got arrested in London, and he did 53 days in jail at our local jail out on Exeter Road. And I got a phone call from him, and he said, I'm looking for a bus ticket to go home to my family in Brockville. Would you be able to help? And I didn't think it would be that difficult, but we were unable to get him a bus ticket. So those that do a shorter amount of time in custody, there is far less available to them as far as support than for someone that does 2 years or more. As you mentioned, Pastor Kevin, like if they're on parole, they would be set up in a halfway house. So there's a lot more support available to them than someone, for example, that would do 30 days at the Windsor jail that would be released at 9 o'clock in the morning. with no support in place at all.
And so today you're getting out of jail. Do you just walk out the door? Do you get taken somewhere? Like what happens?
Well, you would hope that you would have someone that was there to pick you up, to bring you to your probation officer to get some community support. But in some cases, they are just released first thing in the morning with not even a bus ticket. And the London jail is not even close to downtown or any of the supports available in the community.
I don't often tell the story, but jail shaped my life too before I was a chaplain. In fact, when I was, this is, it's interesting how, if your story and mine, such a strange intersection. When I was in high school, there was a Christian man that worked at the Windsor jail, and they had a student program where high school students could be, they could get funding to have a student come and work in the front office. And at the age of 16, actually, it was 2 summers that I did it. I forget how old I was exactly, but around 16. I had a summer job working in the front office at Windsor Jail. And so I would answer phones, I would take care of filing things. But then with the guards, I would also sometimes go back into the jail and would have lunch and just got exposed to that whole thing. And when I was in high school, I didn't have a clue about what I was going to do with my life. And so I had just wanted to get high school done as quick as possible. And I just wanted to get a job and make a bit of money. And I was a young musician, so I just wanted to jam. I just wanted to write songs and play guitar. But when I graduated from high school, I had this job, and then I got a opportunity from the same guy that had me doing the student program. I don't even remember how it all came about, but at 18 years old, I became a correctional officer in the Windsor jail. I'm this naive church kid. When I went into grade 9, I was also 90 pounds. I think I was 4'10". So we probably, if we went to the same school, we probably would have been wrestling partners because nobody else was that small, but shot up through high school. So by the time I'm 18, I'm, 5'11". I probably weighed 135 pounds, just this scrawny guy. And I was working as a correctional officer. I don't even know how that was possible, except let's just say that I think God wanted me to see some things. So being a correctional officer at that age, never having a violent bone in my body, also dealing with a certain amount of feelings of rejection growing up and nothing real traumatic, but now I'm in an environment where I'm the guy with the keys. I'm a screw. And I discovered at that time in corrections that so I knew guards that were just as vile and corrupted as the guys behind bars. In some cases, more vile and corrupt than the guys behind bars. They and so as a young Christian man, I thought, well, I need to treat people with dignity and respect, and that didn't fly very well as a guard. The other guards, I think they could see I was vulnerable, and they, just wanted to toughen me up. But I just remember one time there was a First Nations guy that was in solitary, and this particular shift I was sitting, um, sort of in the guards would sit just off from the range, so that you're not looking at the prisoners all the time. And sitting there with the other guard, and right next to us was a door into solitary, and so I wandered in and just struck up a conversation with the guy. And the other guard said to me, "Don't waste your time talking to him. Don't bother with him." And so I stepped back, and I thought, well, isn't that interesting? I'm not really able in an environment where I can do much to help somebody at 18 years old. And then one night on shift, the alarm went off, and downstairs there was other holding cells, and some guy that came in, and he was on suicide watch, and they had him in the wool baby dolls, and he was trying to gouge out his vein with his thumb. He's trying to cut himself and end his life. And so when the alarm goes, the guards all come together, because you don't know what you're going to be facing. And so I stood there watching um, other guards go in and attend to this guy, but they're swearing at him, cursing him, and just humiliating him while they're putting him in restraints and going to get him to medical. And so I left there after a few months, just really thunderstruck by a side of the world that I didn't know anything about, and but God used that. He used that to actually turn me into a pretty fearless and courageous guy that isn't afraid to face down, um, difficult situations and chaos. And but I had to go through that. I had to see that. I hardly ever share that, but I'm sharing that with you today, Alan.
Awesome.
Yeah, isn't it interesting? Because if we're I was born in '61, so we're just a couple years apart, and it in another world that there could have even been an intersection. And so what I also learned, I think, from that was not to not to judge a book by its cover.
Absolutely.
Every every man, every woman, in spite of anything that they've been charged with, you know, there's somebody made in the image of God that that God wants to redeem, wants to save.
And like I said, in spite of what we have done, the word says that he chose us before the foundation of the world, and by what he did on the cross makes us holy and blameless and free in him.
Thank God, eh? Wow. It really is good news. It really is. Um, so talk to me a little bit about like you have churches that do release kits that are given to people coming out of jail.
Yes.
You've had volunteers that have gone with you, Christians that go in with you to do chapel services and presentations in jail. Um, what are you finding in terms of local churches and integrating people with criminal records? do you find that a lot of churches that are willing to go there? Do you find a lot of churches that are afraid to go there? What are you? What's been your
There would be a
discovery?
combination of both.
Mm-hmm.
There are churches that are not even remotely open to the idea. And then there are churches like ours that we have a lot of the individuals that live in our houses that come here, because our church is very loving and accepting and forgiving, and for lack of a better expression, very low key,
Mm-hmm.
very much like your church in Windsor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, they just feel accepted
Mm-hmm.
and not judged.
Mm-hmm.
And they're when it comes to churches accepting those that are released from custody, there really is no gray area. They are either open to the idea or not open to the idea at all. And one of the things that we do as well is you have been involved in one that we did. We actually do a prison ministry training seminar that lasts about 90 minutes that equips churches right from the biblical mandate of why they should be involved in prison ministry to some of the do's and don'ts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the one thing that has really changed in our ministry, you mentioned that we did a chapel service together at the Blue Water Youth Center
Mm-hmm.
the end of May 2017. I had a brain bleed stroke
Mm-hmm.
that was almost fatal. And there is only a 10% survival rate with the stroke that I had. So as a result of that, that has really limited our ability to do chapel services in the prisons,
Mm-hmm.
which we were doing all across Canada. So we really just concentrate on the four things now that I mentioned
Yeah.
earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember Alan when you went had your brain bleed, and there's a lot of folks praying, and nobody knew if you were going to come out of it, and if you did, what would be your capacity. Um, it you certainly got all your communication skills back.
Thank you.
Yeah, and but I know you have some ongoing issues with mobility, and have had to really adjust life a lot, eh?
Yes.
Yeah. Um, was that anything you saw coming, or was that just out of the blue and
No,
all?
I actually went to work on Monday and it happened at quarter after 12
Mm-hmm.
at night.
Mm-hmm.
And I was rushed to University Hospital to the emergency department. And they actually wanted my wife, Sharon, to sign a DNR
Hmm.
because it was that serious.
Wow. So, were you conscious throughout, or did you lose consciousness?
No, I was conscious throughout the whole thing.
Yeah.
From the ER, I did 5 days in the ICU.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was in University Hospital from the end of May to the middle of July.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to Parkwood, which is a rehab hospital
Yep.
here in London.
Yep. During those days, what did you and Jesus talk about?
Well, the first thing that I really did not want to be was a burden to anyone or a vegetable. At one point, they asked Sharon where I wanted to go, and I pointed up to heaven, and they thought I meant a higher floor in the hospital. And Sharon was like, no, he would like to go home if that's what's decided. Um, we talked a lot about just being closer to him. The real challenge that I faced is just keeping control of my emotions, because emotionally it was very much like being on a roller coaster, and it was just very, very challenging. But I did really grow closer to the Lord and more intimate with him.
Suffering's like that, isn't it? It doesn't announce its arrival until it's there. It just kind of opens the door and bang.
And your relationship with the Lord becomes very real
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in good ways and bad ways.
Yeah. Talk about that. The good and the
Um,
bad. How's it bad?
well, to be honest, I would have thoughts like, Lord, I'm really trying to serve you the best way that I can. Why did you allow this to happen? And what I've come to realize is, Pastor Kevin, he doesn't ask us to understand why he does things. He asks us to be obedient. And there's a vast difference between understanding something and being obedient to it. And then I look back on it now, and without even having to say that you had a relationship with the Lord each and every day, I had an opportunity to demonstrate my relationship with him, because people would see it firsthand by the visitors that you would have to come to see you, just just things that happened every other day.
Mm-hmm.
Like when 90% of those that have a brain bleed stroke like I did don't survive, there's a reason for that.
Yeah, it's harsh. Um, so what's good about going through suffering like that?
Well, I very much understand the reality of we're not dictated by our circumstance or what we see or what we feel. We're dictated by the fact that God doesn't change and he is still in control, and he can't do anything more for us than he has already done,
Hmm.
in spite of what we might see or feel that's going on in our life.
Has it made you an old soul?
I think so.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm far more reflective than I used to be.
Mm-hmm.
I really, really appreciate the small things
Mm-hmm.
and appreciate him for what he's done. But I really appreciate people that I get help from. Um, because with what happened, I do have limitations,
Mm-hmm.
and I need help from time to time.
Yeah, yeah. There's something about the kingdom of God in all this, isn't there? You know, um the our mindset of I'm a man, I'll take care of myself. Uh, you know, I'll do everything I can to succeed, and but then to go through an experience like you have, it opens up that there's this interdependence that you have, that you actually need people.
And to be completely vulnerable
Mm-hmm.
is absolutely the scariest feeling that I've ever had.
Yeah. Well, it's preparing you for eternal life with him, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, we didn't talk about Sharon. And I don't know if you have permission to talk about Sharon, but uh, tell me how you and Sharon met. And
So
yeah,
in 1987, I was on parole in London, and I volunteered at the Arcade Street Mission.
yeah,
And Sharon would come in and play the guitar and minister in music. And we met playing pool at the Arcade Street Mission. And she wouldn't give me the time of day. I was still very much rough around the edges.
mm-hmm,
And so 5 years later, after I had gone through Turning Point, I was working in Toronto for the Salvation Army Men's Hostel. I got invited to a wedding that she wanted to go to. So I called her and invited her to the wedding. And she would tell you that as soon as she picked up the phone, she recognized the voice.
hmm,
Well, we went to the wedding the long weekend of in 1992, Victoria Day. And then for every weekend for May, June, and July, I would come back to London from Toronto and stay on Ken Quarry's couch so I could spend time with Sharon. Well, then I got a job here with the Salvation Army in London and moved back. And we got engaged in August of 1992. We got married June the 26th, 1993. And our mutual friend, Jamie Smith,
yeah.
on my wedding day said, Alan, before you only did 4 years, now you're doing life with no parole. And we just celebrated 30 years on the 26th of June
Oh,
this
that's
past
awesome.
year.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I've met Sharon many times with you, and yeah, what a team you guys are. I mean, you the yin and yang, eh?
I married way up.
Yep. Yeah, she's a sweetie. Um, so I just one more thing I want to just mention. Um, the all of the things that we've talked about, the podcast that Refuge does, the Refuge website, that'll all be in the show notes at Sidewalk Skyline podcast.com. But I do want to just ask in one last question, and that is, how can people and churches get involved with Refuge Ministries Canada? I know that that you are funded by donors, and what kind of annual budget do you have to raise, and how can people get involved, and then also what how 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 able are you to travel and speak these days?
I can do it locally in the London area.
Mm-hmm.
Our website is www.refugeministriescanada.com. All of our contact information is on there. And if they would like to donate or become a monthly supporter, they can just go to donate, and there is a form that they can fill out, and we're set up to automatically withdraw monthly support from their account.
Mm-hmm.
But above and beyond anything else, prayer is the
Yeah.
most important thing.
Yeah.
With the houses that we do, the individuals that live in the houses, they do pay rent.
Mm-hmm.
So that does cover the cost of the rent for those houses.
Mm-hmm.
We don't really have a large budget, but we do have a need for financial support if anyone prays and
Mm-hmm.
feels that they would like to do that.
Yep. What's an annual budget? Like, What do you have to raise every year at this point?
Around $10,000.
That's all?
Yeah.
Oh, that's nothing. I mean, in the scheme of fundraising. Well, I said that was the last question, but what would you do if if the Lord opened doors and you were given 100,000 or $1 million? How would you envision being able to multiply the effect?
Well, I mean, the reality of it is the need is so great for the houses that we do. We would like to do a lot more than just 5.
Hmm.
Um,
Do you have a dream?
Really, more than anything, it's just to demonstrate Jesus.
Yeah.
And
You don't need money for that, right?
no,
Yeah.
but it would just be to establish more houses
Mm-hmm.
and make a greater impact,
Mm-hmm.
and more train churches all across Canada to
Mm.
be involved in prison ministry in their community.
Yeah. 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 Alan, it's amazing how God has used you over these years to you're just every year you're touching dozens of lives, and every year you're helping disciple people and helping to equip other Christians in their calling. And so yeah, I'm glad we had a chance to be on today and talk about your life, because I just want you to know that you inspire me, and you have for many, many years, and I'm just, it's cool to call you a friend.
And I remember how we met. It was the Beggar's Banquet on a
Yes.
Friday night at New Song Church.
Ah, yeah.
And it was your street level conference,
Mm-hmm.
and Dwight Ozard was the speaker.
Oh my goodness. Wow. That's going back.
And I'm not sure what year it was, but I know it was
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
few.
It was a few. Yeah. Yeah. And hey, we our city Windsor is happening just March 22nd, 23rd at New Song Church in Windsor. We'll put a link on the show notes for the Our City Windsor conference. In fact, Bill Riley has a commercial that promotes the conference, and that'll be part of this episode as well.
And we're actually coming down for that.
Yes, you are. Yeah, you and a couple others involved in Refuge. I'm looking forward to having you guys with us. Um, hey, for our regular listeners, on the next episode of Sidewalk Skyline podcast, I'm going to be talking with Cal and Chrissy Cron. Cal and Chrissy live in Montreal, and they, for many years, were in pastoral ministry, and God called them to go into French language training in Montreal, and to have a ministry reaching French-speaking people in Quebec. And so they've had quite an exciting journey, and they'll be on our next episode. So until that time, thanks for listening, and I'm your host, Kevin Rogers. You've been listening to Sidewalk Skyline Podcast.
Hello, I'm Bill Riley. I work with Kevin Rogers on the production of Sidewalk Skyline Podcast. There's so many great stories and thoughtful people engaged in good work in Canadian cities. Some of our past guests will be participating in an event that I want to tell you about. Our City Windsor is an urban conference taking place on March the 22nd and 23rd at New Song Church in Windsor, Ontario. The theme is Signs of Hope. It is an answer to the question, what hope do we have for this rampant homelessness addiction, food insecurity, and general malaise of city life in Canada. You will get to meet and engage with a group of community-building compassion entrepreneurs that deeply care and are making a difference in their city. The conference is only $49 and taxed if you register online. Otherwise, you'll pay $65 at the door. Go to www.ourcitywindsor.ca to get all the relevant details and be encouraged as you find like-minded people that believe the love of God can change the world.